Maya Henderson, a black woman, was abruptly blocked from boarding her first-class flight. The staff had no idea who she truly was, until they saw her badge, and everything changed in an instant. How will Maya take this moment and transform it into something much more powerful? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Maya Henderson's alarm blared at 5 a.m., jolting her awake. She rubbed her eyes and sat up, her heart heavy with the weight of the day ahead. The small apartment felt colder than usual as she swung her legs over the side of the bed. With a deep breath, Maya stood up and walked to her closet. She pulled out a well-worn suitcase, its edges frayed from years of work trips. But this wasn't a work trip. This was personal and far more daunting. As she began to pack, Maya's mind wandered to memories of her mother. The smell of fresh-baked cookies on Sunday afternoons, the sound of gospel music floating through their small house, the pride in her mother's eyes when Maya graduated high school. But then came the arguments, the disappointment, the hurt. FBI? Her mother had said, her voice filled with disbelief. You want to work for the very system that oppresses our people? Maya shook her head, trying to push the painful memory away. She folded a sweater and placed it in the suitcase, her movements slow and deliberate. The ticking of the clock on her bedside table seemed to grow louder with each passing minute. Maya felt like she was racing against time, but also dreading its passage. Each item she packed brought her closer to a confrontation she'd been avoiding for years. As she zipped up the suitcase, her phone buzzed. Maya's heart skipped a beat. She knew who it was before she even looked at the screen. Chris's message was simple but devastating. Mom doesn't have much time left. Maya's hand trembled as she held the phone. She sat down on the edge of the bed, suddenly feeling dizzy. The reality of the situation hit her like a punch to the gut. She'd known her mother was sick. That's why she'd finally agreed to this visit. But hearing it put so bluntly made it real in a way she wasn't prepared for. Tears welled up in Maya's eyes. She blinked them back, taking deep breaths to steady herself. Years of FBI training had taught her how to stay calm in high-pressure situations. But this was different. This was family. This was her mom. Maya looked around her apartment, at the life she'd built for herself. Awards and commendations lined her bookshelf, testaments to her success in a career her mother never understood or accepted. For a moment, she wondered if it had all been worth it. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the sound of Maya's shaky breaths. She stood up, smoothing out her clothes and squaring her shoulders. It was time to face the past, to confront the hurt, and maybe, just maybe, find a way to heal. With one last look around, Maya grabbed her suitcase and headed for the door. The journey ahead would be the toughest she'd ever faced, but she knew she had to take it. For her mom, for herself, for the family that had been broken but might still have a chance to mend. Maya arrived at the bustling airport, her heart racing as she pulled her suitcase behind her. The cacophony of announcements and chattering travelers seemed distant, muffled by her own swirling thoughts. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the journey ahead. As she approached the security checkpoint, Maya's FBI training kicked in. She methodically removed her shoes, placed her belongings in the plastic bins, and walked through the metal detector with practiced ease. It was a familiar routine, one that usually brought her comfort. But today, it felt like just another hurdle between her and the inevitable confrontation with her past. While waiting to retrieve her belongings, Maya's mind drifted to the last conversation she'd had with her mother before leaving for the FBI academy. The disappointment in her mother's eyes had been palpable, her words cutting deep. "You're turning your back on everything we believe in," her mother had said, her voice trembling with emotion. "How can you protect a system that's hurt our people for so long?" Maya had tried to explain, to make her mother understand that change could come from within. But her words had fallen on deaf ears, and the rift between them had only grown wider with time. Shaking off the memory, Maya collected her things and made her way to the check-in counter. The attendant, a young woman with a kind smile, greeted her warmly. "Good morning, Ms. Henderson," she said, glancing at Maya's ticket. "I see you're flying first class today. Let me get you checked in right away." Maya nodded, grateful for the small kindness. As the attendant processed her ticket, Maya felt a momentary sense of relief. The familiar routine of travel, the polite interactions, they were a welcome distraction from the emotional turmoil brewing inside her. "Here you go, Ms. Henderson," the attendant said, handing back her boarding pass. "Have a pleasant flight." Maya managed a small smile. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. As she turned away from the counter and headed toward her gate, Maya's thoughts remained heavy. The weight of her mother's illness, the years of unresolved tension between them, pressed down on her shoulders like an invisible burden. She found a seat near her gate and settled in for the wait, her mind a whirlwind of memories and worries. The airport bustled around her, but Maya felt oddly isolated, as if she were in a bubble of her own making. Maya approached the boarding gate, her steps measured and purposeful. The familiar routine of air travel had momentarily calmed her nerves, but as she neared the first-class line, an uneasy feeling crept over her. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the countless times she'd flown for work without incident. As she reached the gate agent, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and thin-rimmed glasses, Maya offered a polite smile. The agent's eyes swept over her, lingering on her casual travel attire and carry-on bag. Maya's smile faltered as she noticed the woman's lips purse into a tight line. "This is the line for first class," the agent said, her voice dripping with condescension. The words hung in the air, sharp and unexpected. Maya blinked, taken aback by the agent's tone. She felt a familiar tightness in her chest, the kind that always accompanied these moments of prejudice. But years of FBI training had taught her to remain composed in tense situations. She took a steadying breath, reminding herself of who she was and what she'd accomplished. "Yes, I'm aware," Maya replied calmly, her voice steady despite the hurt bubbling beneath the surface. She reached into her bag and pulled out her ticket, handing it over with a level gaze. The agent's eyebrows rose slightly as she took the ticket. She scrutinized it, turning it over in her hands and examining it from every angle. The seconds ticked by, feeling like hours to Maya as she stood there, acutely aware of the growing line behind her. Finally, the agent looked up, her expression a mix of disbelief and suspicion. "There must be a mistake," she declared, her voice loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Maya's heart sank as she watched the agent wave over a security officer. The burly man approached, his hand resting casually on his belt as he assessed the situation. Around them, the buzz of conversation dimmed as curious passengers turned to watch the unfolding scene. The tension in the air thickened, pressing down on Maya like a physical weight. She stood tall, her FBI training kicking in as she prepared to handle the situation with grace and professionalism. But beneath her calm exterior, a storm of emotions raged: frustration, anger, and a deep, aching sadness. As the security officer reached them, Maya couldn't help but think of her mother. How many times had she faced similar situations? How often had she been made to feel less than, simply because of the color of her skin? In that moment, standing at the gate with all eyes on her, Maya felt a newfound understanding of her mother's perspective begin to take root. The security officer arrived, his steps measured and purposeful. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, his uniform crisp and authoritative. As he approached, his eyes darted between Maya and the gate agent, quickly assessing the situation. The gate agent leaned in, her voice hushed but urgent as she explained her unfounded suspicions to the officer. Maya couldn't make out the exact words, but the agent's gestures and furtive glances in her direction spoke volumes. Maya felt the weight of judgment pressing down on her from all sides. The whispers in the line grew louder, a rising tide of curiosity and speculation. She became acutely aware of the stares boring into her back, the sideways glances from nearby passengers. Some had even pulled out their phones, their cameras trained on the unfolding scene. Clenching her fists at her sides, Maya took a deep breath. She called upon years of training and experience, reminding herself to stay calm and composed. But as she stood there, the center of unwanted attention, a bitter realization washed over her. This wasn't just about a first-class ticket or a misunderstanding at the gate. This was about how she was perceived, judged, and treated because of the color of her skin. The security officer stepped closer, his expression neutral but his eyes watchful. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and controlled, "I'm going to need to see your ID." Maya felt her stomach twist in frustration. She had faced situations like this before, but it never got easier. Each time, it chipped away at her, leaving her feeling exposed and vulnerable. But she refused to let them see her struggle. With steady hands, Maya reached into her bag for her wallet. As she did so, she couldn't help but think of her mother. How many times had she faced similar indignities? How often had she been made to prove herself worthy of basic respect and decency? In that moment, standing at the gate with all eyes on her, Maya felt a newfound understanding of her mother's perspective begin to take root. The gulf between them, once so wide and insurmountable, seemed to narrow just a little. Maya pulled out her ID, the weight of it in her hand a reminder of all she had accomplished. She was Special Agent Maya Henderson of the FBI, a woman who had worked tirelessly to earn her place in the world. And yet, here she stood, having to justify her presence in a first-class line. As she handed over her ID, Maya met the security officer's gaze. Her eyes were steady, her chin held high. She may have been feeling frustrated and angry inside, but she wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break. Maya, keeping her composure despite the public humiliation, reached into her bag once more. This time she pulled out her FBI badge, the metal gleaming under the harsh airport lights. With a steady hand she held it up firmly, her fingers gripping the leather case. "I'm Special Agent Maya Henderson, FBI," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering. The words hung in the air, cutting through the buzz of whispers and speculation that had surrounded her moments before. The effect was immediate. The gate agent's face, previously flushed with righteous indignation, drained of color. Her eyes widened, darting between Maya's face and the badge she held. The security officer, who had been standing tall and authoritative, seemed to shrink back, his posture deflating as the realization of their mistake sank in. The atmosphere in the boarding area shifted palpably. The tension that had been building dissipated, replaced by a heavy blanket of embarrassment. Passengers who had been openly staring now averted their eyes, suddenly finding great interest in their phones or the floor. "We didn't know," the gate agent mumbled, her voice barely above a whisper. She wrung her hands nervously, clearly rattled by the turn of events. The words hung in the air, inadequate and hollow. The security officer cleared his throat, his earlier confidence now completely evaporated. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding," he stammered, struggling to find the right words. Apologies began to flood in from all directions. The gate agent, the security officer, even some of the nearby passengers who had been quick to judge, all stumbled over themselves to express their regret. Their words blended together in a cacophony of "I'm sorry" and "we had no idea," and "this is so embarrassing." But for Maya, their apologies felt distant and meaningless. She stood there, her badge still held high, feeling strangely detached from the scene unfolding around her. The sting of discrimination cut deep, leaving her feeling hollow inside. As she lowered her badge and tucked it back into her bag, Maya couldn't shake the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about a misunderstanding or a case of mistaken identity. It was a stark reminder of the prejudices she faced every day, even in her position as an FBI agent. The gate agent, still flustered, began to process Maya's boarding pass with shaking hands. "Again, we're so sorry, Agent Henderson. Please, let me upgrade you to our premium first-class section as a token of our apology." As Maya was hurriedly escorted onto the plane, a flurry of apologies continued to pour from the airline staff. Their words, though well-intentioned, did little to ease the humiliation she had just endured. The flight attendants, now aware of the situation, bent over backwards to accommodate her, their smiles a bit too wide, their voices a touch too eager. "Can I get you anything, Agent Henderson? A pillow? Some water?" one attendant asked, hovering nervously. Maya shook her head, managing a tight smile. "No, thank you. I'm fine." As she settled into her plush first-class seat, Maya's mind raced with frustration. The leather felt cool against her skin, but she couldn't relax. Though the incident had been smoothed over on the surface, the damage was done. The stares of other passengers followed her, a mix of curiosity and pity that made her skin crawl. She closed her eyes, trying to shut out the world, but the scene at the gate kept replaying in her mind. The suspicion in the gate agent's eyes, the immediate assumption that she didn't belong. It was all too familiar. Maya reflected on the countless times she had been forced to prove herself, not just as an FBI agent, but as a black woman in a world that seemed determined to question her at every turn. Each time, she had to be stronger, smarter, more composed than anyone else. The weight of those expectations pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. The earlier incident had reopened old wounds, bringing to the surface feelings she usually kept buried deep. Maya couldn't help but think of her mother, who had never fully accepted her career choice. In her mind's eye, she could see her mother's disapproving frown, hear her voice saying, "This is exactly why I didn't want you joining the FBI. You'll always be fighting an uphill battle." A lump formed in Maya's throat as she remembered their last conversation before her mother fell ill. The argument had been heated, with her mother insisting that Maya was turning her back on their family values, on their community. "You think that badge will protect you?" her mother had asked, her voice thick with emotion. "You think it'll make them see you as equal?" Now, as the plane began to taxi, Maya felt the truth of those words more acutely than ever. Her FBI badge, which she had worked so hard to earn, hadn't shielded her from prejudice. If anything, it had only highlighted the stark reality of the world she navigated daily. Before the plane lifted off the ground, Maya settled into her seat, trying to regain her composure. She took a deep breath, her chest rising and falling slowly as she prepared herself for the emotional journey ahead. The incident at the gate still stung, but she knew she had to focus on what truly mattered now. Her phone buzzed in her hand and Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was a new message from her brother, Chris. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "It's worse, Maya, you need to get here fast." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Maya's heart dropped, and a cold fear washed over her. The possibility that she might not make it in time to see her mother suddenly became all too real. She stared at the message, reading it over and over, willing it to change. As the plane climbed higher, Maya turned to look out the window. The city below grew smaller, buildings and streets fading into a patchwork of lights and shadows. She pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her mind racing with thoughts of her mother. All the things left unsaid between them weighed heavily on Maya's heart. The arguments, the disappointments, the misunderstandings, they all seemed so trivial now. She wondered if she'd ever have the chance to make things right, to bridge the gap that had grown between them over the years. Memories flooded her mind. Her mother's proud smile at her high school graduation, the warmth of her hugs when Maya was a child, the way her eyes lit up when she laughed. But these happy memories were quickly overshadowed by the more recent ones. The hurt in her mother's eyes when Maya announced she was joining the FBI, the tense silences during holiday dinners, the phone calls that ended in angry hang-ups. Maya closed her eyes, fighting back tears. She thought about all the times she had chosen work over family, all the missed opportunities to reconnect. Now, as the plane carried her towards what might be her last chance, she felt a deep regret settling in her chest. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered, her words lost in the hum of the engines. "Please, just hold on. I'm coming." As the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, Maya leaned back in her seat, her mind drifting to memories of her childhood. She closed her eyes, and the bustling cabin faded away, replaced by images of her past. Maya saw herself as a little girl, sitting in the front pew of their small church, her mother's hand resting firmly on her shoulder. The smell of old hymnals and polished wood filled her senses. She remembered the pride in her mother's eyes as she recited Bible verses from memory, the gentle squeeze of approval when she sang in the choir. But as the memories flowed, they began to change. Maya recalled the first time she mentioned her interest in law enforcement. She was just 16, full of dreams and ambition. Her mother's face had fallen, disappointment etched in every line. "That's no place for a woman of faith," her mother had said, her voice stern. "Especially not my daughter." The words echoed in Maya's mind as clear as the day they were spoken. She remembered the arguments that followed, the tension that grew with each passing year. When Maya finally announced her decision to join the FBI, it was like a chasm opened between them. Her mother's words still stung. "You're turning your back on everything I taught you, on everything we believe in." Maya shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the bitterness of those memories leaving a sour taste in her mouth. She knew in her heart that her career was the right choice for her. The FBI had given her purpose, allowed her to fight for justice and protect the innocent. But the cost of that choice, the rift with her mother, weighed heavily on her soul. Now, with her mother possibly on her deathbed, Maya felt a deep ache in her chest. She longed for her mother's approval, for just one moment of understanding between them. Would they ever find peace? Would her mother ever see that Maya's faith guided her work, that she was living out her beliefs in her own way? Maya's eyes stung with unshed tears as she gazed out the window at the endless sky. She wondered if it was too late to bridge the gap between them, to find some common ground before it was all over. As the plane touched down, Maya felt her heart rate quicken. A mix of dread and urgency filled her chest, making it hard to breathe. She gripped the armrests tightly, willing the plane to taxi faster to the gate. The moment the seatbelt sign turned off, Maya was on her feet, reaching for her carry-on bag. She pulled out her phone, checking for any new messages from Chris. The screen was blank, but his last text still burned in her mind. "You need to get here fast." Maya rushed through the airport, her FBI training kicking in as she navigated the crowded terminals with efficiency. But even as she focused on getting to her mother as quickly as possible, her mind kept replaying the incident at the departure gate. The suspicious looks, the condescending tone of the gate agent, the humiliation of having to prove herself yet again. It all swirled in her thoughts. She felt a familiar tightness in her throat. Even now, in the midst of a family crisis, the world wouldn't let her forget who she was or where she came from. Maya shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She couldn't let that distract her now. Her mother needed her. As she exited the airport, the humid air hit her like a wall. Maya scanned the line of waiting taxis, her heart pounding with every second that ticked by. She raised her hand, waving urgently at an approaching cab. "Hospital, please," Maya said as she slid into the back seat, her voice tight with worry. "As fast as you can." As the taxi pulled away from the curb, Maya leaned back and closed her eyes. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself. The incident at the airport kept creeping back into her thoughts, but she pushed it aside. Right now, all that mattered was getting to her mother in time. Maya opened her eyes, watching the city blur past the window. She silently urged the taxi to go faster, knowing that every minute could make a difference. Her hand clutched her phone, ready for any update from Chris. The familiar streets of her hometown flew by, stirring up memories of her childhood. But Maya couldn't dwell on them now. Her focus was solely on reaching the hospital, on seeing her mother one last time. She prayed it wasn't too late to make things right between them. Maya stepped into the hospital lobby, the sharp smell of disinfectant immediately assaulting her senses. The sterile environment felt cold and unwelcoming, a stark contrast to the warmth she remembered from her childhood home. Her eyes scanned the area, searching for a familiar face. "Maya!" She turned to see her brother Chris hurrying towards her. His face was drawn with worry, dark circles under his eyes telling of sleepless nights. As he reached her, Chris pulled Maya into a tight hug. For a moment, she let herself be held, drawing strength from her brother's presence. "How is she?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chris pulled back, his hands still on Maya's shoulders. "She's been in and out of consciousness," he said, his voice low and strained. "The doctors, they're not sure how much time she has left." Maya felt her heart constrict. She nodded, unable to find words. Chris gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze before leading her towards the elevators. As they rode up in silence, Maya's mind raced. What would she say if her mother woke up? How could she bridge the gap of years of estrangement in what might be their final moments together? The weight of unresolved conflicts and unspoken words pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. The elevator doors opened with a soft ding, and Chris led Maya down a long corridor. The rhythmic beeping of machines and hushed voices of nurses filled the air. Maya's FBI training had prepared her for high-pressure situations, but nothing could have readied her for this. As they neared their mother's room, Maya's steps slowed. Chris looked back at her, understanding in his eyes. "It's okay," he said softly. "She'd want you here." Maya took a deep breath, steeling herself. She thought of all the times she'd faced danger head-on in her job, never flinching. But this, facing her dying mother after years of silence, felt like the most daunting challenge of her life. With trembling hands, Maya reached for the door handle. The weight of years of misunderstanding and hurt seemed to press against her, making the simple act of opening the door feel monumental. She hesitated, her hand on the cool metal as a flood of memories washed over her. Arguments about her career choice, tearful goodbyes, and years of stony silence. Chris placed a comforting hand on her back. "We're in this together," he murmured. Maya nodded, drawing strength from her brother's support. She took one more deep breath and pushed the door open, stepping into the room that held her past, present, and uncertain future. Maya stepped into her mother's hospital room, her heart pounding in her chest. The sight before her made her breath catch in her throat. There, lying in the sterile white bed, was her mother. A shadow of the strong, vibrant woman Maya remembered from her childhood. The room was quiet except for the steady beep of monitors. The air felt heavy, filled with unspoken words and years of tension. Maya's mother looked so small and fragile, her skin pale against the stark hospital sheets. Her eyes were closed, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. Chris moved forward, his steps soft on the linoleum floor. He gently took their mother's hand, checking on her with a tenderness that made Maya's heart ache. She remained by the door, frozen in place, unsure of how to approach. A flood of emotions washed over Maya as she stood there. Anger bubbled up first. Anger at the years lost, at the arguments that had driven them apart. Then came regret, heavy and suffocating. She regretted the harsh words spoken in the heat of the moment, the pride that had kept her from reaching out. But underneath it all was a deep, aching longing. Maya longed for the warmth of her mother's embrace, for the comfort of her voice. She wished things had been different between them. If only they had found a way to bridge the gap to understand each other's perspectives. Now, looking at her mother's frail form, Maya felt the weight of time pressing down on her. It seemed cruel that they might have run out of chances to make things right. The possibility that it might be too late to mend their relationship hung in the air, as tangible as the antiseptic smell of the hospital room. Maya took a hesitant step forward, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. She searched for any sign of the strong-willed woman who had raised her, who had taught her to stand up for what she believed in, even if it had ultimately driven them apart. Maya finally mustered the courage to move closer to the bed. Each step felt heavy, as if her feet were weighed down by years of unresolved tension. She lowered herself into the chair beside her mother, the plastic creaking softly under her weight. With trembling fingers, Maya reached out and took her mother's hand. It felt cold and fragile, like a delicate bird's wing. The contrast to the strong, warm hands she remembered from childhood brought tears to Maya's eyes. As she sat there holding her mother's hand, memories flooded Maya's mind. She remembered heated arguments in the kitchen, her mother's voice rising as she questioned Maya's choice to join the FBI. "How can you turn your back on everything we believe in?" her mother had demanded. Maya recalled the hurt and confusion in her mother's eyes, the disappointment that had cut deeper than any harsh words. Other memories surfaced too: missed phone calls, unanswered messages, holidays spent apart. Each one felt like a missed opportunity, a chance to bridge the gap that had grown between them. Maya thought of all the times she'd wanted to reach out, to explain her choices, but pride and stubbornness had held her back. Now, sitting in the quiet hospital room, Maya silently prayed. She prayed for her mother to open her eyes, for one more chance to talk. She longed to explain why she'd chosen her path, to help her mother understand that her faith and her career weren't at odds. More than anything, Maya yearned to hear her mother say she was proud, to feel that approval she'd been seeking for so long. But her mother remained still and silent. The only response to Maya's unspoken pleas was the steady beeping of the machines monitoring her mother's vital signs. The rhythmic sound seemed to mock Maya, a constant reminder of how little time they might have left. Maya squeezed her mother's hand gently, willing her to wake up. She leaned in close, her voice barely above a whisper. "Mom, please," she said, her words choked with emotion. "I need you to wake up. There's so much I want to tell you, so much I need you to know." Chris watched his sister's internal struggle with a heavy heart. He moved closer to Maya, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Hey," he said softly, his voice filled with warmth and understanding. "You're here now. That's what matters." Maya shook her head, her eyes never leaving their mother's face. "I should have come sooner," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "All this time wasted. I was so stubborn, so caught up in my own life." Her shoulders slumped under the weight of her regret. Chris squeezed her shoulder, trying to offer comfort. "Maya, you can't blame yourself. Mom, she was always stubborn and proud, just like you." He paused, a sad smile tugging at his lips. "Maybe that's why you two butted heads so much." Maya turned to look at her brother, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "But I left, Chris. I walked away and barely looked back. How could she love me after that?" Chris leaned in, his voice earnest. "She loved you, Maya, even if she didn't show it. You're her daughter. That never changed, no matter how far apart you were." Maya wanted to believe her brother's words, but doubt gnawed at her heart. She looked back at their mother, so small and frail in the hospital bed. The beeping of the machine seemed to grow louder, a constant reminder of how little time they might have left. "I don't know, Chris," Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've done so much, achieved so much in my career. But sitting here now, none of it feels important. All I can think about is how I let our relationship fall apart." She struggled to hold back tears, feeling the full weight of their broken relationship bearing down on her. The guilt was overwhelming, threatening to crush her as she watched her mother's chest rise and fall with labored breaths. Chris moved his chair closer, wrapping an arm around Maya's shoulders. "Listen to me," he said gently. "Mom was proud of you, even if she didn't say it. She kept every newspaper clipping about your cases, you know. She followed your career even from a distance." Maya looked at Chris in surprise, a glimmer of hope flickering in her eyes. "She did?" Chris nodded, a small smile on his face. "She did. She might not have understood your choices, but she never stopped caring about you, Maya." As Maya processed this information, she felt a mix of emotions washing over her. Relief, sadness, and a renewed sense of loss for the years they'd spent apart. She reached out and took her mother's hand again, holding it tightly. "I just wish—" Maya's voice cracked and she took a deep breath to steady herself. "I wish we had more time. There's so much I want to tell her, so much I need her to know." As the hours ticked by, Maya remained rooted to her chair beside her mother's bed. The rhythmic beeping of the machines and the soft whoosh of the ventilator filled the room, a constant reminder of her mother's fragile state. Maya's eyes never left her mother's face, searching for any sign of movement, any flicker of consciousness. Chris paced the room, his worry evident in every step. He paused by the window, looking out at the fading daylight. "Maya," he said gently, "maybe we should go for a short walk, get some fresh air. We've been here for hours." Maya shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't leave her, Chris. What if she wakes up and I'm not here?" The thought of missing even a moment with her mother was unbearable. Chris nodded, understanding his sister's need to stay. He settled back into his chair, watching Maya with concern. As Maya sat there holding her mother's hand, her mind wandered to all the things she'd wanted to say over the years. The proud moments she'd longed to share, the apologies she'd rehearsed but never delivered, the explanations she'd wanted to give. Now, faced with the possibility of never having the chance, the weight of those unspoken words pressed heavily on her heart. "I should have tried harder," Maya thought, her grip on her mother's hand tightening slightly. "I should have made her understand why this career was so important to me." The memory of the airport incident earlier that day suddenly flashed through her mind. The suspicion in the gate agent's eyes, the humiliation of being questioned, the need to prove herself yet again. It was a stark reminder of the battles she'd been fighting her entire life. Maya closed her eyes, feeling a wave of exhaustion wash over her. Her whole life had been a constant struggle for respect, for love, for acceptance. In her career, she'd faced discrimination and doubt at every turn. And at home, she'd fought for her mother's approval, never quite feeling like she measured up. Opening her eyes, Maya looked at her mother's face, so peaceful in unconsciousness. She wondered if her mother had ever truly understood the challenges she faced, the strength it took to pursue her dreams in a world that often seemed set against her. "I wish you could see me now, Mom," Maya whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I wish you could understand why I had to do this, why it matters so much." Chris watched his sister, his heart aching for her pain. He wanted to comfort her, to reassure her, but he knew that right now, all Maya needed was time with their mother, even if she couldn't respond. As the night deepened outside the hospital window, Maya remained vigilant, her eyes never leaving her mother's face. She was determined to stay, to be there for whatever came next, holding on to hope that there might still be a chance for understanding, for reconciliation, for the love and acceptance she'd always craved. As Maya sat by her mother's bedside, her mind drifted back to the humiliating scene at the airport. The sting of discrimination still burned, and she felt a growing need for justice. Suddenly, she remembered her mother's rare moments of pride in her work, despite their differences. It was as if a light bulb went off in her head. With renewed determination, Maya pulled out her phone and stepped into the hallway. She dialed the airline's headquarters, her voice steady as she reported the incident. "I want to file a formal complaint," she said firmly, recounting the details of what had happened. As she spoke, Maya felt a mix of emotions. There was anger at the unfair treatment, but also a sense of empowerment. She thought of her mother, of how she'd always taught Maya to stand up for herself. Even though they disagreed on so much, this was one lesson Maya had taken to heart. After ending the call, Maya leaned against the wall, suddenly overwhelmed. The weight of everything, the airport incident, her mother's illness, years of estrangement, came crashing down on her. Her legs felt weak and she slid down to the floor, no longer able to hold back her tears. Years of pent-up frustration, anger, and sadness poured out. Maya sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking with each breath. She thought of all the times she'd wanted her mother's approval, all the arguments they'd had, all the missed opportunities to connect. As she sat there, lost in her grief, a gentle hand touched her shoulder. Maya looked up to see a kind-faced nurse kneeling beside her. "It's okay to let it out, honey," the nurse said softly, offering Maya a tissue. Maya took it gratefully, wiping her eyes. I don't know if I'll ever get the chance to make things right," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. The nurse's eyes were filled with understanding. "You know," she said gently, "it's never too late to forgive." Those words hit Maya like a thunderbolt. She looked at the nurse, her eyes wide with realization. "Even if," Maya hesitated, "even if she never wakes up to hear it?" The nurse nodded. "Forgiveness isn't just for the other person. It's for you, too." As the nurse walked away, Maya sat there pondering her words. Could she find it in her heart to forgive her mother? To let go of the hurt and disappointment? Even if her mother never opened her eyes again, never heard Maya's words of forgiveness? Maya stood up slowly, feeling drained but somehow lighter. She took a deep breath, wiped her eyes one last time, and turned back towards her mother's room, the nurse's words echoing in her mind. Maya returned to her mother's bedside, her heart heavy but her mind clearer. She sat down in the chair next to the bed, taking her mother's frail hand in hers. The steady beep of the heart monitor filled the room, a constant reminder of how precious these moments were. Taking a deep breath, Maya began to speak softly. "Mom, I don't know if you can hear me, but there's so much I need to say." Her voice trembled slightly as she continued. "I want to tell you about my life, about the woman I've become. I know it's not the path you wanted for me, but I hope you can understand why it means so much to me." Maya's eyes welled up with tears as she described her career in the FBI. She talked about the challenges she'd faced, the discrimination she'd encountered, and the strength she'd found within herself to overcome it all. "Remember when I was little, and you taught me to stand up for what's right? Well, that's what I do every day, Mom. I fight for justice, just like you taught me." As she spoke, Maya felt a warmth spreading through her chest. It was as if each word was helping to mend the broken pieces of their relationship. "I'm sorry, Mom," Maya whispered, her voice cracking. "I'm sorry for all the years we spent not talking, for all the hurtful things we both said. I wish I had tried harder to make you understand." Tears rolled down Maya's cheeks as she continued to pour out her heart. She told her mother about her fears, her hopes, and her dreams. She spoke of the loneliness she'd felt without her mother's guidance, and the pride she hoped her mother would feel if she could see her now. "I know we didn't agree on everything, but I always loved you, Mom. I always will." As Maya spoke, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Each word seemed to chip away at the wall that had stood between them for so long. Even though her mother lay silent, Maya felt a connection she hadn't experienced in years. "I forgive you, Mom," Maya said softly, squeezing her mother's hand. "And I hope, somewhere deep down, you can forgive me too." As Maya rested in the chair beside her mother's hospital bed, her eyes closed in exhaustion, her phone suddenly buzzed to life. The vibration startled her awake, and she fumbled to answer it, her heart racing with worry that it might be news about her mother's condition. "Hello?" she answered, her voice thick with fatigue. "Ms. Henderson, this is Thomas Carter, Regional Manager for Skyline Airlines. I'm calling about the incident at the airport earlier today." Maya's body tensed as she remembered the humiliation she'd endured. She stood up and walked to the corner of the room, not wanting to disturb her mother. "Yes, Mr. Carter, I remember it quite clearly," she replied, her tone measured but firm. "On behalf of Skyline Airlines, I want to offer our sincerest apologies for the treatment you received. It was unacceptable, and we take full responsibility for our staff's actions." Maya listened silently as the manager continued. "We'd like to offer you complimentary reward points and upgrade your return flight to first class as compensation for your troubles." For a moment, Maya was tempted by the offer. But then she thought about all the times she'd faced similar discrimination, all the people who didn't have an FBI badge to protect them. "Mr. Carter," Maya interrupted, her voice steady and determined. "I appreciate your apology, but a free flight isn't going to solve the real problem here." "I'm sorry, Ms. Henderson, what do you mean?" The manager sounded confused. Maya took a deep breath before responding. "What happened to me today isn't an isolated incident. It's a symptom of a much larger issue. If you really want to make things right, you need to change your entire process." "We're open to suggestions, Ms. Henderson. What did you have in mind?" Mr. Carter asked, his tone now more serious. "I want to see mandatory training for all your employees on racial bias and discrimination. Not just a one-time seminar, but ongoing education. And I want to see visible changes in how you treat all your passengers, regardless of their race or appearance." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Maya held her breath, wondering if she'd pushed too far. Finally, Mr. Carter spoke. "Ms. Henderson, you're absolutely right. We can and should do better. I give you my word that we will implement these changes. Would you be willing to consult with us on developing this training program?" Maya felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, I'd be happy to help ensure these changes are meaningful and effective." As she ended the call, Maya felt a sense of accomplishment. She had turned a painful experience into an opportunity for real change. Glancing back at her mother's sleeping form, she wondered if perhaps this was the kind of thing that would have made her proud. As Maya sat by her mother's bedside, her heart heavy with unsaid words and unresolved feelings, she felt the weight of their estrangement pressing down on her. She had been talking to her mother for hours, pouring out her heart, but there had been no response. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only sound in the room, a constant reminder of how fragile her mother's life had become. Just as Maya was about to give up hope, she noticed a slight movement. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Her mother's fingers twitched ever so slightly in her hand. Maya's heart leapt, and she squeezed her mother's hand gently. "Mom?" she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. "Mom, can you hear me?" Encouraged by this tiny sign of life, Maya continued talking, her words tumbling out in a rush of emotion. "Mom, I love you so much. I'm so sorry for everything, for all the fights, for all the years we've lost. I never meant to hurt you. I hope you can forgive me." Tears streamed down Maya's face as she spoke, her voice choked with emotion. She wasn't sure if her mother could hear her, but she kept talking, desperate to bridge the gap between them before it was too late. "I know you didn't understand my choice to join the FBI, but I want you to know that I've always carried your teachings with me. Your strength, your faith, they've guided me every step of the way." As Maya spoke, she felt a slight pressure on her hand. She looked down and saw her mother's eyes flutter open, focusing directly on her. It was a brief moment, lasting only a few seconds, but to Maya, it felt like an eternity. In that fleeting gaze, she saw a lifetime of love, pain, and forgiveness. Her mother's grip tightened ever so slightly before her eyes closed again. It wasn't much, but to Maya, it meant everything. In that small gesture, she felt her mother's forgiveness, her love, and her acceptance. A wave of relief washed over Maya, bringing with it a sense of peace she hadn't felt in years. The burden she had been carrying for so long seemed to lift, replaced by an overwhelming feeling of gratitude. In the days that followed, Maya and Chris settled into a routine at the hospital. They took turns sitting by their mother's bedside, their voices filling the quiet room with memories and laughter. Despite the beeping machines and the sterile environment, there was a warmth that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, Maya found herself sharing a story from their childhood. "Remember that time we tried to bake a cake for Mom's birthday?" she asked Chris, a smile tugging at her lips. Chris chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How could I forget? We made such a mess in the kitchen. There was flour everywhere." "And Mom walked in just as we were trying to clean it up," Maya added, her laughter mingling with Chris's. As they reminisced, Maya felt something shift inside her. The weight she had been carrying for years seemed to lighten with each shared memory. She looked at her mother's peaceful face and realized that the anger and resentment she had held onto for so long were fading away. "You know," Maya said softly, turning to Chris, "I've been so focused on our differences that I forgot about all the good times we had." Chris nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's easy to forget when you're hurting, but Mom always loved you, Maya, even when she didn't agree with your choices." Maya reached out and took her mother's hand, feeling the frailty of it in her own. "I wish I had realized that sooner," she whispered. As the days passed, Maya found herself opening up more. She shared stories about her work with the FBI, not just the challenges, but the moments that made her proud. She talked about the people she had helped and the difference she had made. "I think Mom would be proud of you," Chris said one evening as they sat together in the dim light of the hospital room. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. "You think so?" Chris nodded. "She might not have understood your choices, but she always admired strength. And you, sis, are one of the strongest people I know." Those words touched Maya deeply. She realized that she had been carrying the burden of her mother's disapproval for far too long. It was time to let it go. As Maya sat there, holding her mother's hand and talking softly with Chris, she felt a sense of healing wash over her. The resentment that had been a constant companion for so many years began to melt away, replaced by a newfound appreciation for her family and the love they shared. In the days that followed, Maya and Chris settled into a routine at the hospital. They took turns sitting by their mother's bedside, their voices filling the quiet room with memories and laughter. Despite the beeping machines and the sterile environment, there was a warmth that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the window, Maya found herself sharing a story from their childhood. "Remember that time we tried to bake a cake for Mom's birthday?" she asked Chris, a smile tugging at her lips. Chris chuckled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "How could I forget? We made such a mess in the kitchen. There was flour everywhere. And Mom walked in just as we were trying to clean it up," Maya added, her laughter mingling with Chris's. As they reminisced, Maya felt something shift inside her. The weight she had been carrying for years seemed to lighten with each shared memory. She looked at her mother's peaceful face and realized that the anger and resentment she had held onto for so long were fading away. "You know," Maya said softly, turning to Chris, "I've been so focused on our differences that I forgot about all the good times we had." Chris nodded, understanding in his eyes. "It's easy to forget when you're hurting, but Mom always loved you, Maya, even when she didn't agree with your choices." Maya reached out and took her mother's hand, feeling the frailty of it in her own. "I wish I had realized that sooner," she whispered. As the days passed, Maya found herself opening up more. She shared stories about her work with the FBI, not just the challenges, but the moments that made her proud. She talked about the people she had helped and the difference she had made. "I think Mom would be proud of you," Chris said one evening as they sat together in the dim light of the hospital room. Maya felt tears prick at her eyes. "You think so?" Chris nodded. "She might not have understood your choices, but she always admired strength. And you, sis, are one of the strongest people I know." Those words touched Maya deeply. She realized that she had been carrying the burden of her mother's disapproval for far too long. It was time to let it go. As Maya sat there holding her mother's hand and talking softly with Chris, she felt a sense of healing wash over her. The resentment that had been a constant companion for so many years began to melt away, replaced by a newfound appreciation for her family and the love they shared. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the hospital room, Maya and Chris found themselves alone together for the first time in days. Their mother had drifted off to sleep, her breathing steady and peaceful. Maya turned to her brother, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and regret. "Chris," she began, her voice soft and hesitant, "I need to thank you for something." Chris looked at her, his eyebrows raised in question. "What's that?" Maya took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "For being here for Mom when I couldn't be. For taking care of her all these years while I was away." Chris's face softened and he reached out to squeeze Maya's hand. "Maya, you don't have to thank me for that. She's our mom. I did what I could, just like you're doing now." Maya shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "But I wasn't here. I let my anger and hurt keep me away for so long. You never gave up on either of us." Chris pulled Maya into a tight hug, his voice thick with emotion. "Listen to me, sis. You've done enough. You're here now, and that's what matters. Mom knows how much you care. She always has, even when things were tough between you two." Maya clung to her brother, letting his words wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt the heavy burden of guilt begin to lift from her shoulders. As they pulled apart, Chris looked Maya in the eyes. "We're family, Maya. It's never going to be perfect, but we're making progress. That's what counts." Maya nodded, wiping away a stray tear. "You're right. I just wish I had realized it sooner." "Hey," Chris said, a small smile on his face. "Better late than never, right?" Maya couldn't help but laugh softly. "Yeah, I guess so." As they stood there side by side looking at their sleeping mother, Maya felt a sense of closure beginning to settle in. The road ahead might still be challenging, but she knew now that she wasn't walking it alone. Her family, imperfect as it was, would be there with her every step of the way. Maya stepped into the FBI office, her head held high and her stride purposeful. The familiar buzz of activity surrounded her, but something felt different. She felt different. The time spent with her family had changed her, giving her a renewed sense of confidence and determination. As she made her way to her desk, Maya's phone buzzed with a news alert. She paused to read it, her eyes widening in surprise. The airline she had confronted was making headlines with an announcement of sweeping changes to their policies and training programs. Maya felt a surge of pride, knowing that her stand had made a real difference. Her colleague, Agent Johnson, approached with a warm smile. "Welcome back, Henderson. We saw the news about the airline. That's quite an impact you've made." Maya nodded, her expression serious. "It's a start, but there's still work to be done. I'm not looking for an apology. I want real, Systemic change. As word spread of Maya's return, more colleagues gathered around her desk. Some offered words of support, while others shared their own experiences with discrimination. Maya listened intently, realizing that her personal struggle had opened up a much-needed conversation within the bureau. Special Agent Ramirez, Maya's supervisor, called her into his office. "Henderson, I want you to know that the entire team stands behind you. What can we do to support you in pushing for further changes?" Maya felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had always felt like an outsider, fighting her battles alone. But now, looking at the earnest faces of her colleagues, she realized she had allies, people who believed in her and were ready to stand by her side. "Thank you, sir," Maya said, her voice steady and determined. "I think it's time we review our own policies and training. We can set an example for other law enforcement agencies." Ramirez nodded approvingly. "I couldn't agree more. Let's set up a task force. I want you to lead it, Henderson." As Maya left Ramirez's office, she felt a sense of empowerment she had never experienced before. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was using her voice for something bigger, something that could make a real difference in the world. After a few weeks, Maya returned to the hospital, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The sterile smell that once filled her with dread now felt familiar, almost comforting. She made her way to her mother's room, pausing at the door to take a deep breath before entering. Inside, Maya found her mother sitting up in bed, looking stronger than she had in weeks. The older woman's eyes lit up as Maya walked in, a sight that still surprised Maya every time she saw it. "Hey, Mom," Maya said softly, settling into the chair beside the bed. "How are you feeling today?" Her mother reached out, grasping Maya's hand with a strength that seemed impossible just days ago. "Better," she replied, her voice still weak but filled with warmth. "Much better now that you're here." Maya felt a lump form in her throat. These small moments of connection, once so rare between them, were becoming more frequent. She squeezed her mother's hand gently, savoring the touch. As they sat together, Maya shared stories about her work, carefully avoiding the more dangerous aspects that had always worried her mother. To her surprise, her mother listened intently, asking questions and showing genuine interest. "You know," her mother said during a lull in the conversation, "I've been thinking a lot about the choices you've made in your life." Maya tensed, expecting criticism, but her mother continued, "I may not have understood them all, but I can see now how much good you're doing in the world." Maya's eyes widened in surprise. She searched her mother's face, finding no trace of the disapproval that had once been so common. Instead, she saw something she had longed for her entire life, a look of pride. The days passed and Maya continued her visits. Each time she noticed small changes in her mother, a smile that came more easily, a gentler tone when they spoke about difficult topics from the past. There were no grand declarations or tearful apologies, but Maya could feel the shift in their relationship. One afternoon, as Maya was helping her mother with her physical therapy exercises, she noticed her mother watching her intently. "What is it, Mom?" Maya asked, curious about the expression on her mother's face. Her mother shook her head slightly, a small smile playing on her lips. "I'm just realizing how strong you are, Maya. Not just physically, but in every way. I'm sorry it took me so long to see it." Maya felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. "It's okay, Mom. We're here now, and that's what matters." As Maya prepared to leave that day, her mother reached out and touched her arm. "I'm proud of you, Maya," she said softly. "I hope you know that." Maya nodded, unable to speak past the emotion clogging her throat. She leaned down and hugged her mother gently, feeling the love and acceptance she had craved for so long. As Maya's mother's health improved steadily, the day finally arrived for her discharge from the hospital. Maya felt a mix of excitement and nervousness as she helped her mother pack her belongings. The nurses and doctors who had cared for her mother over the past weeks came by to wish them well, their smiles reflecting the joy of seeing a patient recover. Maya, her mother, and Chris made their way to the airport, a stark contrast to Maya's earlier anxiety-filled trip. This time, the atmosphere was light and hopeful. As they approached the check-in counter, Maya was surprised to see several airline staff members waiting to greet them. "Welcome, Ms. Henderson," a staff member said warmly, addressing Maya's mother. "We're honored to have you and your family flying with us today." Maya felt a surge of emotion as she watched her mother's face light up at the special treatment. She caught Chris's eye, and they shared a knowing smile. This was more than just good customer service. It was a visible sign of the changes Maya had pushed for after her previous experience. As they boarded the plane, Maya couldn't help but reflect on how different this journey was from her last. The flight attendants were attentive and kind, making sure Maya's mother was comfortable throughout the trip. When they finally arrived at Maya's apartment, there was a moment of awkwardness as Maya's mother took in her new surroundings. But it quickly passed as Maya showed her to the guest room, which she had carefully prepared. "It's not much," Maya said, suddenly feeling shy, "but I hope you'll be comfortable here." Her mother reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's perfect, Maya. Thank you." Over the next few days, Maya and her mother fell into a new routine. They shared meals, watched TV together, and had long conversations about everything and nothing. There were still moments of tension, old habits that died hard, but they both made an effort to listen and understand each other. One evening, as they sat on Maya's small balcony watching the sunset, her mother turned to her with tears in her eyes. "I'm sorry, Maya," she said softly, "for all the years we lost." Maya felt her own eyes well up. "Me too, Mom. But we're here now, and that's what matters." As the sky turned from orange to purple, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the humiliation at the airport, to the fear in the hospital, and now to this moment of peace. She realized that each challenge had made her stronger, had pushed her to fight not just for herself, but for something bigger. If you enjoyed the story of Maya Henderson, I handpicked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.